For 2,500 years, humanity had been the quiet species. Not weak. Not naive. Just deliberately restrained. In the vast architecture of the Galactic Council, humans were known as administrators, shipwrights, mediators, the ones who drafted trade clauses no one read and enforced ceasefires no one remembered starting. They spoke last, voted cautiously, and never once threatened force. Their war fleets, once infamous, had been ceremonially dismantled after the first interstellar collapse, their weapons sealed behind treaties older than most stars currently mapped. The Council called them civilized. The Predators called them domesticated. That misunderstanding cost 12 million lives. Ambassador Elias Crow stood alone at the edge of the Council Hall, watching alien delegates chatter and posture beneath the massive stardome ceiling. He'd stood here hundreds of times before. Smiled politely. Chosen his words carefully. Swallowed insult after insult for the sake of peace. Today, he wore black. No diplomatic sash. No insignia. Just a plain, utilitarian uniform and a narrow silver band on his wrist, the Terran symbol of mourning. The automated announcer chimed. "Representative of the United Terran Systems, you may approach." Crow walked forward. The hall quieted, not out of respect, but curiosity. Something about him felt off. Humans were usually expressive, diplomatic. This one moved like a man attending a funeral he'd personally paid for. At the central dais sat the council's speaker, Veshare of the Korth Prime. Feathers shimmered faintly as the avian alien inclined its head. "Ambassador Crow. You are out of protocol." Crow stopped precisely 1 meter short of the podium. "Protocol ended 3 hours ago, Speaker." A ripple of murmurs spread across the chamber. Veshare clicked its beak, displeased. "Clarify your statement." Crow looked around the hall. At the Velthari delegation, insectoid armored, smug. At the neutral blocks who'd abstained 1 vote too many. At the old powers who pretended balance was the same as justice. At 0300 Terran Standard, Crow said, voice level, the Velthari Dominion launched an orbital saturation strike against the human colony world HFY. The Velthari ambassador twitched but said nothing. "Population," Crow continued, 12 million. No planetary defense grid. No shipyards. No military assets. HFY was a refugee settlement. A few delegates shifted uncomfortably. Crow raised his eyes. 40% of the population were children. Silence fell, not the polite kind, but the heavy, suffocating kind that precedes denial. The Velthari ambassador finally rose. "This is an internal security action. That system lay within disputed." "They broadcast it," Crow interrupted. Every head turned. "They broadcast the strike. Multiple angles. Commentary. Celebration." He lifted his wrist. The hologram exploded into existence. Fire poured across the chamber, cities dissolving into incandescent dust as orbital cannons carved glowing scars across a blue-green world. The scream of atmosphere tearing itself apart. The image of a Velthari commander laughing as the planet's surface buckled and burned. "No further strikes required," the Velthari voice said cheerfully in the recording. "But additional fire authorized for morale." The feed cut. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the Velthari ambassador clicked angrily. "Collateral damage occurs in enforcement actions. Humanity understands this. You waged wars once. You glassed worlds." "Yes," Crow said quietly. "We did." He leaned forward slightly. "And it nearly destroyed us. That's why we signed the Great Peace Accords. That's why we dismantled our fleets. That's why we trusted this council to enforce the law equally." His voice hardened. "We petitioned for arbitration. You delayed. We requested sanctions. You debated. We asked for peacekeeping forces." Crow looked directly at Veshare. "You did nothing." The speaker's feathers ruffled. "Ambassador, emotions do not justify breaches of galactic law. The accords explicitly forbid." "We know," Crow said. The interruption shocked the chamber more than his earlier one. Humans didn't interrupt speakers. Crow straightened. Which is why I am not here to request permission. The words landed like a dropped blade. Veshare hesitated. Then why are you here? Crow exhaled slowly. When he spoke again, there was no anger left, only resolve. On behalf of the United Terran Systems, he said, I formally announce humanity's withdrawal from the Great Peace Accords, effective immediately. The chamber erupted. Threat glyphs flared. Security drones rose from concealed alcoves. Delegates shouted in a dozen languages. The Velthri ambassador laughed, a sharp, clicking sound. You break a treaty honored for 2.5 millennia? For one insignificant colony? Crow turned to face him. One colony, he repeated. 12 million people. Families. Teachers. Farmers. Refugees who believed the Council would protect them. His eyes burned now. You didn't just kill them. You reminded us why we stopped trusting empires. The Velthri spread his mandibles. You think yourselves warriors again? Your fleets are museum pieces. Your doctrine's obsolete. Crow smiled. It was small. Cold. Dangerous. We didn't forget how to fight, he said. We just remembered when not to. He tapped his wrist once more. Across human space, alarms that hadn't rung in centuries began to scream. Deep in forgotten shipyards marked decommissioned by council inspectors, sealed vaults unlocked. Hulls long buried beneath treaties and paperwork awakened as power flowed into dormant cores. Generals whose commissions were older than most alien governments opened files they'd sworn never to use. Crow turned away from the dais. This session is concluded, he said over his shoulder. As he walked out, the council speaker finally found its voice. Ambassador Crow, Veshare called. If humanity chooses war, the galaxy will respond. Crow didn't stop walking. Good, he said quietly. It's been a long time since anyone paid attention. And far beyond the council hall, in the dark between stars, something ancient stirred. Not rage, not conquest, but a promise humanity had kept buried for 25 centuries. Never again. The galaxy had no memory of how humans prepared for war. Humanity did. Within minutes of Elias Crow's declaration, every dormant Terran contingency protocol went live. Across United Terran Systems space, status lights long dismissed as ceremonial flickered from green to red. Old shipyards, officially dismantled, unofficially mothballed, split open like iron coffins as armored hulls emerged from behind false bulkheads and civilian facades. The Council had inspected those yards dozens of times. They'd never looked closely enough. Admiral Marcus Hale stood on the bridge of the UNS Iron Oath, hands clasped behind his back, boots planted on a deck scarred by refits layered over centuries. He was old by human standards, white hair, a spine that complained in cold vacuum, but his eyes were clear and merciless. Fleet status, he said. 84% of reserve assets activated, his operations officer replied. The rest will be online within the hour. Sleeper crews are thawing now. Hale nodded once. Plenty. A younger lieutenant hesitated. Sir? Velthri naval strength outnumbers us 6-1. Their ships are faster, cleaner, and fully automated. Hale allowed himself a thin smile. That's because they're built for parades. On the main screen, the stars stretched and snapped as the Iron Oath tore into Velthri border space, followed by a human fleet that looked nothing like a unified armada. Different hull designs. Different eras. Some ships still bore faded registry marks from wars older than the Council itself. What they shared was mass. And intent. Velthri border stations detected them instantly. Automated challenge signals flooded Terran channels, followed by contemptuous threat declarations. Unidentified vessels, you have violated sovereign Velthri space. Power down and submit to inspection. Hale didn't bother responding. Bring us in slow, he said. The Velthri commander watching the sensor feed sneered. They advance without evasive patterning. Are humans suicidal? Then space folded. A human destroyer fired first, not with energy, but with gravity. The localized gravitic pulse collapsed inward, crushing 3 Valkyrie cruisers as if an invisible fist had squeezed them shut. Armor buckled. Reactors imploded. The wreckage scattered like shrapnel. Valkyrie comms erupted in panic. Gravwell weapon detected! Those are prohibited under Council law. Hale leaned forward slightly. So is orbital genocide. Human ships surged ahead. Valkyrie plasma lances carved incandescent lines through space, striking human hulls dead on. Sections of armor vaporized. Atmosphere vented in violent white plumes. Warning klaxons howled across Terran bridges. No one pulled back. Human vessels absorbed the hits and kept coming, using momentum instead of maneuvering thrusters, letting physics do what fear could not. Their targeting systems were mostly manual, human gunners calculating firing solutions by instinct and experience rather than algorithms the Valkyrie had already tried, and failed, to hack. A human corvette lost its engines, drifting helplessly. Its captain opened a fleet-wide channel. All ships, this is Spearfall. We're out of the fight. Hale watched as the corvette's course shifted, subtly, deliberately. No, you're not, he murmured. The Spearfall slammed into a Valkyrie carrier at relativistic speed. The collision tore both ships apart, and a heartbeat later the corvette's captain manually breached his reactor. The explosion lit space brighter than a newborn star. The Valkyrie commander stared in horror. They're ramming us. Intentionally. A weapons officer whispered. They're not retreating from damage. They don't retreat from anything, Hale said softly. Across the engagement zone, human, civilian, vessels began to change shape. Cargo haulers unfolded hidden missile racks. Mining drones swarmed, their industrial lasers retuned to carve through armor instead of rock. Trade escorts revealed torpedo tubes that had never appeared on Council manifests. The Valkyrie realized the truth too late. Humanity had never disarmed. They had redistributed. Within the hour, Valkyrie border defenses collapsed. Not overwhelmed, Au thought. Their doctrine assumed enemies valued ship preservation, command hierarchy, and survival odds. Human doctrine assumed only one thing. The mission matters more than the ship. As the last Valkyrie bastion detonated, a priority message cut through the fleet. Admiral, the comms officer said quietly, Council peacekeepers are en route. They're ordering an immediate ceasefire. Hale looked at the burning wreckage drifting across the stars. Send them a reply, he said. What should it say, sir? Hale didn't hesitate. Tell them the ceasefire was available 12 million lives ago. The human fleet pressed deeper into Valkyrie space, engines burning hot and relentless, carrying with them a truth the galaxy had forgotten. Peace had never tamed humanity. It had only given them time to prepare. The Council thought it could intervene. They were wrong. By the time the first peacekeeper fleets arrived, the Valkyrie were already broken, not glassed, not obliterated, but surgically dismantled. Military academies lay in rubble. Orbital shipyards twisted like paper in the wind. High command bunkers had been collapsed from within, corridors rigged to explode only after evacuation. Civilian structures? Mostly untouched, a message written in stone and steel: you will not be allowed to continue killing like this. On the capital world of the Valkyrie Dominion, a single Terran dropship pierced the atmosphere. It landed with the precise inevitability of a judge delivering a sentence. Dust and shattered marble swirled around its reinforced hull. From it stepped Colonel Sarah Cade, her boots crunching on fragments of a society that had once deemed themselves untouchable. She activated a channel. Valkyrie High Command, she said, voice calm and cutting. This is where you apologize. The Valkyrie general on the other end clicked his mandibles in outrage. You will be exterminated for this insolence. Cade tilted her head, as if studying a particularly stubborn insect. Worth it. She gestured, and the sky above the ruined capital shimmered. One by one, human fleet assets decloaked, ships that had been hidden for decades in Valkyrie sensor blind spots, seated during joint exercises, trade escorts, even humanitarian missions. They emerged silently, a web of inevitability around the Velthari remnants. The general's voice faltered. You planned this, for how long? For 25 centuries, Cade replied evenly. You called us weak. You underestimated patience. You assumed civility was cowardice. The camera feed showed a human pilot stepping out onto a collapsed bridge of a Velthari battleship, hands on her hips. Peace isn't the absence of violence, she said, voice low. It's violence withheld. Until it becomes necessary. Across Velthari space, sleeper protocols activated. Civilian mining drones unfolded like predatory insects, deploying hidden turrets. Terraforming rigs doubled as missile platforms. Cargo vessels opened concealed compartments filled with antimatter torpedoes. Every ordinary Terran asset suddenly became a weapon, and every Velthari calculation of superiority crumbled under the weight of centuries-long preparation. The Council scrambled to issue sanctions, to call for ceasefires. Their fleets arrived only to find human forces in full control, not through overwhelming numbers, but through meticulous strategy. They weren't annihilating the Velthari, they were dismantling their ability to start another war. In orbit over the shattered Velthari capital, Cade leaned close to the comm camera again. You see this? She said. This is what happens when you treat a species with patience as a curiosity, when you ignore their warnings for centuries. This isn't vengeance. This is education. The Council watched in stunned silence. Delegates whispered in dozens of languages, translating to the same sentiment. We misjudged them. Back on Earth, Ambassador Crow stood in a quiet observation room, hands shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of what had been unleashed. He had led humanity to victory, yes, but at the cost of seeing the worst of their nature rise in response to unthinkable cruelty. He understood something the Council could not. Peace was a privilege humanity never took lightly, and once stripped away, their fury was precise, relentless, and inevitable. For the Velthari survivors, surrender came not with glory, not with ceremony, but with quiet, humiliating inevitability. The message from humanity was clear: the galaxy would no longer tolerate cruelty at the expense of the innocent. Cade exhaled. Send them home, she said to her crew. Tell the Council the lesson is learned. And across the ruined Velthari capital, the last ember of their arrogance burned out, replaced by an understanding no treaty could ever enforce. Humanity does not forgive. Humanity does not forget. And humanity, when awakened, is unstoppable. The war lasted 12 days. 12 days was all it took for humanity to remind the galaxy of a truth long ignored. Numbers and protocol mean nothing against a species that has spent centuries preparing for just this moment. By the 13th day, the Velthari Dominion had ceased to exist as a military power. Their surviving worlds were placed under monitored autonomy. Shipyards, academies, and command centers were dismantled, not destroyed, but neutralized, with human kill switches embedded in every system. No fleet could rise again without Terran oversight. Their soldiers surrendered not out of fear of death, but because resistance was no longer an option. Humanity had turned inevitability itself into a weapon. The Council reconvened in solemn silence. Ambassadors shuffled papers nervously, while fleets of once feared civilizations awaited instructions, wary of what they had just witnessed. For the first time in the Council's history, the delegates spoke in hushed tones about a species that had been domesticated for millennia but was, in truth, a predator in disguise. Ambassador Elias Crow returned to the chamber, older, wearier, yet steadier than before. Veshari, the Korth Prime Speaker, bowed slightly, a gesture never extended lightly. You have shattered the peace, the speaker said carefully, every feather on its head bristling. Crow nodded. Yes. You have proven the Council wrong. Yes. A pause lingered. Veshari's voice softened. What does humanity want now? Crow looked out across the chamber. He thought of Havenfall, of the children, of a galaxy that only listened when blood was spilled. We want what we always wanted, he said finally. A peace that actually means something. The delegates leaned in, sensing there was more. Crow paused, then added softly. One more thing. Next time, we won't wait 25 centuries. A ripple of unease passed through the council. Every empire, every alliance, recalculated the threat assessment of the species they had long dismissed. Humans were no longer quiet, no longer polite observers. They were awake. Humanity did not reclaim the title of conqueror. They claimed something more enduring: reputation. The reputation of a species that ends wars not with annihilation alone, but with precision, patience, and the kind of fury that is remembered for generations. And somewhere, in the dark expanses between stars, every empire updated their defensive protocols, whispered warnings in forgotten tongues, and remembered one lesson they would never forget. When humans decide the time for peace is over, they do not hesitate. They do not negotiate. They do not fail. Humanity is no longer silent. Humanity is awake. And the galaxy will never mistake civility for weakness again.